Good morning, everyone. I'm Bruce Gordon. I'm the Director of Communications for the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to discuss one of the most important tasks you will have as a parent, and involves teen driving. The smashed up car door, the deployed airbags, this is what happens when people are in a crash. These are the realities of a crash. But unfortunately, these are just pieces of a car. What can happen to the lives in the car is far worse. Traffic crashes are the second leading killer of Minnesota teens. This past weekend was a stark reminder of that fact. Minnesota State Patrol says speed and failure to use a seatbelt played a role in a crash that killed a 16-year-old from Butterfield, Minnesota. In 2013, there were 38 fatal crashes where a teen driver was involved. There were 6,040 crashes involving at least one teen driver ages 16 and 17. That averages to more than 16 crashes per day. To better prepare teens for their driver's licenses and to provide parents with the resources to help their teens become safer drivers, the Minnesota legislature passed and Governor Dayton signed enhanced requirements under the graduated driver licensing law. There are several people here today who are going to speak to that legislation and discuss the changes that are coming on January 1. Gordy Pearson, who is the Youth Driving Programs Coordinator for the Office of Traffic Safety. Sarah Schott is the mother of a teen driver who recently attended a parent awareness class. Elsa Jane Schott, you're going to hear from her, but unfortunately, she had school commitments, so you'll hear from her the 15-year-old through a video interview we conducted recently. Deb Carlson is the Driver and Vehicle Services, will be available to answer any questions. And we are very grateful that both Senator Susan Kent and Representative Kim Norton were able to join us here today. They were leaders in the passage of this legislation. So to begin with today, we're going to start with Gordy Pearson. Gordy is the Youth Driving Program Coordinator at the Office of Traffic Safety. Gordy developed the Point of Impact program, which is used in many of the parent awareness classes. Gordy?
Thank you. Good morning. Parenting a teen driver can be very stressful, emotional, and inconvenient, but I can't think of anything more emotional or tragic than attending my own teen's funeral. While progress is made over the years in reducing the number of teen deaths resulting from motor vehicle crashes continue to be a leading cause of teen deaths in Minnesota, especially during the first year of licensure. Earlier this year, the Minnesota legislature passed enhanced requirements under the graduated driver licensing law that take effect January 1st. These changes will better prepare teens before they get their driver's license and provide parents with knowledge and resources to help their teens become safer drivers. In the past, teens were required to complete at least 30 hours of supervised driving experience, 10 of which needed to be at night. The new legislation requires teens to have at least 50 hours of supervised driving experience, of which 15 must be at night. Now, these hour of requirements are minimum requirements. We recommend that parents would practice with their teen well beyond the minimum requirements to ensure that they prepare their teens to be able to face the many different driving situations and weather conditions that they will eventually experience on their own. Provisional driver license test requirements will require the teen to submit a supervised driving log when they take their provisional driver license test. That particular log does have to be signed by a supervising driver like a parent or guardian, and it will list the dates and the number of hours of supervised driving that the teen experienced while under an instruction permit. The supervised driving log also helps parents track the progress that they've made with their teens when they were learning how to drive, and will identify areas that they might need to improve or practice a little bit more. The log does become part of the teen's driving record. Enhancements to the law also require that all driver education programs provide parent awareness classes to parents who wish to receive it. Parents do play a critical role in preparing their teens to become safe and responsible drivers. To fulfill this role, the parents need to understand what today's teen driving risks are. They may be a little bit surprised by that. They may not be the same as when they were young and learning how to drive. They need to also understand what the teen driving laws and how they associate to those risks. They also need to understand how strong their influence is in helping their teens to become safer teen drivers, and then be provided with tools and resources to fulfill that important role. It's very important that parents stay involved and aware of their teens driving, just as they would with other sorts of activities and how they're doing in school. When making decisions about their teen driver, parents need to put safety ahead of convenience. That's very important. Just because a teen has their license, it doesn't mean that they're ready for every driving situation, so parents should continue to work with their teens even after they're licensed. Parent awareness classes are already being conducted throughout the state. Sarah Schott is a mother of a 16-year-old driver who already has his license and a 15-year-old who has her learner's permit. Sarah recently attended a parent awareness class, and I'd like to invite Sarah to come up to talk about her experience.
Thank you, Gordy. As he said, I have a 16-year-old new driver and a 15-year-old permitted driver and another 15-year-old and another 13-year-old, so this is obviously a pretty applicable subject for me. Last year we taught the 16-year-old to drive, and it was without these new laws and without me having thought much about how to teach somebody to drive and what that meant, because it was 30 years ago when I learned to drive, at which time the only thing I remember about learning how to drive was going out once with my mom, coming through the alley, and almost running into a cop. And that was my experience with my mother. And then I remember a few things from my driver's ed person, but I don't remember practicing. And I do remember getting into a few subsequent accidents. So it was, as my children learn to drive, it's extremely important to me. Like, I know what it was like to be in those accidents. I know what it's like to be scared when your kid drives away from your house. And I have that times 4. So I am very thankful to have this class to help me understand what we're getting into and how important it is to be with your kid and to continue to teach them how to drive. We worry every time they leave the house. And so even with our 16-year-old, one thing this class taught me was that you're not done once they turn 16, once they get their license. It's a big deal. Getting their license, we got a great analogy in the class. Getting your license is like passing algebra. But then when you get out you go drive downtown St. Paul or Minneapolis, or it's rush hour, and that's like calculus. It's hard. It's scary when you're lots of traffic situations, and you forget that just the license doesn't allow them to be ready for that. So it's really important that parents keep on driving with their kids even after the license. I'm pretty excited to have picked up so many tips and learned so much through the class. It was only an hour and a half. I go to classes and meetings and things like that for my kids all the time. Every time they're in some activity, there's a parent meeting. So going to another one for this, one of the most important things that they're doing for their lives to keep them safe, is not a big deal. It's not a big deal to track what they're doing. The logging takes moments after you come back. It's all very worthy, in my opinion. I believe that you have a video of my daughter and I driving this weekend. Thank you.
There was a lot of times where, like, I didn't know how to do something, or I just was not, like, I felt like I couldn't do it, but my mom was there and she supported me and she helped me through it. And our neighborhood has a lot of kids in it, so we've talked about how I have to be very, very careful in our neighborhood and be ready to hit the brakes very, very quickly any sudden moment, because it's really important to take it seriously, because even if it's not your life that could be affected, but it could be someone else's. We got into the parking lot and I just kind of freaked out, and I put my foot on the brake or on the gas pretty quickly, and then I went up the curb, but I knew exactly what was happening and I hit the brakes really quickly, but it was still pretty just like, ah. I do have an older brother who has his license, and it's very stressful to be in the car with him because he's not always the safest driver, and he thinks he knows what's best, but you don't know what's best no matter how long you've been driving.
All right, let's head home.
You need to be very wary of what's going on, and you're not invincible. You're very vulnerable. Anyone is very vulnerable when you're driving.
Thank you, Sarah, very much, and thank you for sharing the experience with your daughter as well. We'd like to ask both Senator Kent and Representative Norton to the podium for just a moment. Senator?
Thank you, Gordy. It's interesting, I was in my community recently and I met a young woman whose very promising life was dramatically changed by a traumatic brain injury. And so it brings home the point of how important and significant these issues are. As the Vice Chair of the Transportation and Public Safety Committee in the Senate, we talk a lot about the Towards Zero Death program and initiatives that are made to keep our drivers safe and to keep our highways safe. And one of the things we talk about is how many of us as adults have a hard time remembering sometimes some of the things we learned back in driver's ed, or how much things have changed since those times. And so having these classes for parents to have some refreshers, to have some updates about some of the new laws and requirements for drivers is really very helpful. And the research that we've seen and how successful those programs have been is very important and significant. Like many people, I still have the voice of my driver's ed teacher in my head when I'm out driving on the roads. Like a lot of people, my driver's ed teacher was the school's football coach. I will say, as a bit of trivia, my school's football coach also coached Peyton and Eli Manning, so I count that as an interesting tidbit. But he was a good teacher, and I was honored to have that experience, and I'm pleased to have that memory. And I think we need to make sure that our kids, as they're learning, have that opportunity moving forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here and for your interest in this very important subject. As the author of the graduated driver's license bill a number of years ago, we knew when we passed that very important law that our roads would be safer because of it. But we also knew that it was parents who were going to be the primary enforcers of the graduated driver's license law. And so I watched, and the statistics did get better. That's the good news, as they did when primary seatbelt was enacted, both very important pieces of legislation. But one of the things that became quite obvious is that those parents can only enforce what they know. And I was surprised to find many parents didn't know what the laws were. And I think the driver's education folks were doing their best to provide the data through handouts to those parents, but parents are busy. Their lives are complicated. They're juggling a lot of things, and they didn't always take the time that they needed to really know what those laws were. They didn't read the documents. They meant to. I don't think it was a lack of caring, because when you hand your child the keys, I think every parent's heart tightens just a bit and their fingers cross and they hope their child comes home safely. But I don't think they realized how much control they really did have. So as we entered this last session, it was very important to me to finally move forward with a little different twist to the graduated driver's license law, and that was the parent education component. And that's really where I started, where my interest was. And so the driver's education instructors and law enforcement were very supportive. It's been a pleasure to work with the department as they've rolled out the components, and I'm pleased that we did take the time also to increase the number of behind the wheel hours, because that's again another important component to make our roads safer, not only for our children so they come home safely, but for all of us who drive on the roads with them. So thank you so much to the department for their work, and I'm very excited for the rollout.